Hey, party people. Welcome to Chapter 10, Blood and Biological Evidence. We're going to talk about what it is, how to collect it, how to test it, how to be safe with it, right? That's number one goal is how to be safe with blood evidence and biological evidence. And when I said biological, I'm not talking about like weapons. I'm talking about um, you know biological stuff from people's body and how to be safe with that stuff. Okay, so let's jump to it here. So biological evidence, one of the greatest hazards to personnel, right? You know, hepatitis, AIDS, name an STD, right? It's really bad stuff. So the first thing you need to do is take precautions. As I've said multiple times, if you're not safe, it doesn't matter what's going on because you're not going to be able to, render aid to anyone or provide assistance to anyone else, right? So when collecting biological evidence, gloves, mask, depending on where you are, you may need a face shield, or you may have to put on a full on biohazard suit, right? Um, it just really just depends on the contamination area. So blood evidence, the biggest thing with blood evidence is it human blood, right? People will call the police department because they find bones somewhere, and we gotta send someone out to look at them, and inevitably the coroner will go out and take a look and say, no, it's animal bones or whatever. But the same with blood. If we're called to an area and there's blood all over the place, one of the first things we need to figure out is it human blood? Is it animal blood? Is it blood at all? Right. So there's a bunch of ways we can do that, and some are these presumptive tests. Um, Luminol, that is a spray that we can spray on surfaces, but it works best inside a enclosed environment, a dark environment, because we can ensure that things are dark enough for the luminol to glow. So luminol works really good inside cars, inside houses. People, they blood spills inside the car. They clean it up. Whether they murdered someone inside a car, or they just tried to clean it up. Someone was dead and blood spilled out of them inside the car, and they clean it up. They We are able to go and with luminol spray the inside of the car, and then the blood will glow and show that there is blood there, or at least the proteins of blood. Um, so the luminol works as a visual test to say, yes, there is blood proteins here, but there is a variety of other tests that we can use that are, I don't want to say more scientific, but that you can remove some of the liquid. Let's say you're using a Q-tip, and then put that on a test, and then inside that test, it will then tell you, yay or nay, that it's blood, based on the color spectrum. It's not any different than if you've seen like a field drug test for like methamphetamine, right? If you put some in there and then you break the little insides, it'll turn blue. Blue's positive for methamphetamine. It's the same kind of theory with blood tests. Blood typing, right? If you don't know your blood type, you should. But we as crime scene investigators and law enforcement, we're not particularly concerned with someone's blood type out at a crime scene, right? Like that doesn't particularly concern us immediately. Now, if we find a bunch of blood there, and that blood is later determined to be, AB, and our victim is O, well, it's not going to be our same victim, right? It's going to be another murder victim, which is super awesome, right? Now we have two murder victims laying around. But it that would be the that would be like the most helpful. But as far as crime scene investigations, we're not really too concerned with blood types. It doesn't really come into play as far as the investigation. However, DNA does come into play, right? So DNA discovered in 1984. It was discovered as in the the DNA that we currently know and love today. It was identified as this fingerprint, and they realized that everyone has a different DNA fingerprint, and there is I'm trying to word this correctly. Your DNA fingerprint is more unique than humans on Earth, right? So, we can say, without a doubt, it's your DNA at the crime scene, and there is a 1 in 759 billion chance that it's someone else. Well, there's not 759 billion people on Earth, right? So, that's really when DNA became a thing, and we realized that, hey, DNA can be used for a lot of things, and law enforcement took off with it as using it to identify people, rule out people, not just in identifying people as suspects, but it's, I think I said in like chapter 1, it's just as important to rule out innocent people as it is to chase down guilty people. So DNA really plays a role in that. Even still to this day, Project Innocence is a nonprofit organization that works to people that are able to incarcerated folks that are able to show that there is a high likelihood that they weren't involved in it, in the crime that they were convicted of. Project Innocence will work through the DNA evidence and try to show that in fact they were wrongfully convicted. So super great things happen with DNA, and also we use it to put people at crime scenes, right? Everything from just their fingerprints, and maybe saliva at the crime scene, or semen in a sexual assault. Everything from that to their blood was mixed up with the murder victim's blood, because when they were cutting the murder victim, they cut themselves, right? A person inherits half of their genetic material from each parent, right? We know this. You're 50% your mom and 50% your dad, and yeah. So that's yeah. I mean, this isn't a DNA class, so I'm not particularly inclined to go super deep into DNA and exactly how it works. But to hit the highlights, right? It's half your parents, or I mean, one from each side of your parents. DNA is a polymer, and yeah, that's the highlights, right? Um, The average human chromosome is DNA containing 100 million base pairs, right? So that is how we are able to start to compare people to our suspects, or to rule them out of our suspects, is through the base pairs. Sorry, I meant to take some of these DNA ones out. Here we go. CODIS. This is super important. So CODIS, Combined DNA Index System, is an electronic database of DNA profiles administered through the FBI. Began in the 1990s. So if you're arrested for a felony in the state of California, we take your DNA, and it goes into CODIS, right? So later on, law enforcement has a whodunit crime, and they have DNA, and they can submit it to CODIS. Um, CODIS puts that DNA in the system, and then we'll let law enforcement know, hey, we have a match, or we don't have a match. It doesn't tell us who the person is. I'll explain that in a minute. So the purpose for CODIS is to generate investigative leads, which is why it doesn't tell you exactly who it is. If there is a match, law enforcement from multiple jurisdictions can coordinate their investigations and share leads that they developed. Law enforcement agencies can use the match to obtain a court order authorizing the collection of unknown biological reference samples from the suspect or offender. So when we get a match from CODIS, it'll tell us, hey, there's a match, and then we have to then write a search warrant to CODIS to say, I want to know who that person is. Sometimes we'll get back and it'll be, hey, there's a match, but it's also an unknown person. So now we have this person's DNA in the system, multiple times, right? Like it could be, my case plus the original unknown and some case from Alabama. It could just be the original unknown and then now my new case. But it links those together, right? So even if I'm not able to solve my case immediately based on the CODIS hit, let's say the person gets arrested in 15 years and gets booked into jail for a felony. Their DNA is taken, and that now it's the first time we know whose DNA it is, and it's then put into the system. At that point, it gets searched, and then it gets hit on matches, and then I would get notified, the other agency would get notified, and they would say, hey, we found a match on the DNA that you put in. We then write another search warrant to figure out who it is, and then CODIS will provide all that information to us, and then we can start to work our cases again. So that's often how we get these old case hits from unsolved cases 15, 20 years ago. It's the person has been rearrested for something, and we find their DNA. Also, it's no secret anymore. Law enforcement uses publicly available DNA databases, such as like 123andMe. When you put your DNA in there, and then through their own system they start matching through genealogy, or you go in and start matching people on the database. We take our DNA profile and send it to those companies and say, hey, we want to know anyone that has a match close to this, right? And they will either give us exact matches, or they'll give us what they call familia matches, and those are matches where 50% hit, right? So maybe the crook didn't put their DNA in the system, but their mom or their sister or something like that, or their brother, put their DNA into 123andMe, and through that we were able to identify a familia hit on a bad guy, and through there we can start to work backwards, right? We would then go get a search warrant to take a sample from that person, or we'll use some other method to get their DNA, and then we match it with our DNA profile that we have. to determine whether they are a match or not. So that kind of in a very large nutshell is how CODIS works, and how DNA that is collected would work. So collecting blood evidence. The the thing with blood evidence versus like some other evidence is we don't need to take all of it, right? If there's a pint of blood spilled all over the ground, we don't need to mop it all up and then collect it all. We'll photograph it, measure it, and then take a couple of samples from it. Maybe two or three different samples from different parts, and then we will collect those. We take samples, obviously, by wearing gloves. If you're going to pick up any type of liquids, I recommend wearing a mask, because you don't want to be over the top of it and then and then sneeze or talk or something like that, right? And your DNA becomes mixed up with it. That would be a mess. So, but you use cotton swabs, brand new cotton swabs. They come out of a little packaging, and then you swab the area. If it's dried blood, you can use brand new distilled water, and that will rehydrate the dry area, and then you can collect that, and then you just you put it into the swab container, and then you package it up just like you did everything else. Brown paper bag, label it, and then you're going to transport it. You're going to put a biohazard label on there. Um, it's dry blood in a container. It's not the end of the world, but you don't want someone else to handle it like they're handling, a piece of mail or something like that. You want everyone to know that there's biohazard material in there, and also it will be stored differently. When we're talking about biohazards, samples, stuff like that, we try to dry those out. With the exception of rape kits, we keep those frozen. But with blood, we dry those things out, and we want to make sure that they are marked. So just the people handling them in 10 years know to take appropriate precautions. As always, right? Crime scene personnel should not drink, eat, smoke, use any type of tobacco that would be in an area to compromise the evidence, right? When we're collecting evidence, that's all we're doing is just collecting evidence. We're not collecting evidence and then going over here and doing measurements and then coming back and taking photos. We do it all in a systematic method. So um, if I was processing a bedroom that was a homicide scene, or something like that, where there's blood all over the place, I would go through and photo everything, and measure everything, and then go back and collect stuff. I don't want to take photos, measure, collect, photos, measure, evidence, or collect. If I can avoid it, I just want to do one thing at a time all the way through the crime scene. That way I don't skip a step. And then, as always, right, every step should be documented, and exactly what you're doing. That's where that your scribe, your person that is writing down everything that happens, all your measurements, photo points, all that stuff. That's where your scribe really becomes essential. So what about other biological fluids, right? Maybe we need to collect, semen, saliva, vomit, fecal matter, right? Who knows what we're going to need to collect? Often semen through the rape kits, saliva through rape kits. We want to make sure that we collect that. The good thing is, the method in which to collect them a lot of times is the same. We don't have some sort of special collection method for blood that we don't use for, urine or whatever it is, right? It's kind of the same stuff. So semen can be found through alternate light source, a black light or something like that. And and then we can then collect it from there. If it's dried, and let's say it's on sheets or something like that, we're just going to take all the sheets, right? We're not going to be out at the crime scene trying to cut pieces of the sheet. We'll just take it all. It's no big deal. A mattress, the same thing. We probably aren't going to take the whole mattress, but we'll just cut the top of the mattress off and just roll up the top part, right? And we'll take that. Um, so let's see here. Seminal stains can be helpful in establishing whether or not an alleged sex act occurred. This is important, right? Um, it just because there's semen there doesn't mean it was a sexual assault, and it doesn't mean that it's from that victim. I mean, from that suspect. But we need to at least start with: is there any here, right? If a victim is saying that a sexual assault occurred in this area, is there anything here, right? Is there anything on their clothes? Is there anything on the bed, on the carpet, the floor, wherever it was? Is there anything there? That is super important. Even if it was days ago, right? We want to make sure that we process the scene, even if they said it was 2 weeks ago, right? The chances of us finding something are slim, but we owe it to both the victim and the suspect to process that crime scene. So we can use some presumptive tests while we're there to see if anything gives us a presumptive positive for biological fluids. Um, Much like luminol or alternate light sources, right? They're just presumptive tests. We can't say for sure that yes, this is saliva, this is semen, this is blood, right? This is just a presumptive test. Collecting saliva, much like semen, the same way, right? We just use a cotton swab, and use distilled water if it's dried out. Swab the area and then package it up. How do we take it from the suspect? The same way, right? We take a cotton swab, rub it on the inside of their cheeks, and then take that, put it back into the packaging, and then mark it with biological markings. It is a pretty easy, process to collect fluids and liquids. The major thing that you want to be careful of is your own safety, right? You're touching blood or touching bodily fluids. You don't want to bring something home to your family. So how do we preserve them? Ideal way to preserve biological evidence is to freeze it, comma. If there is a victim's wearing clothes and they're murdered, right, and there's blood all over them, we're not going to uh, keep that stuff frozen once we get our sample. So we will take portions of their shirts or their pants or whatever, collect the blood off of there for evidence, but we are going to dry that stuff out because we already have a sample that we've sent off to the lab, and we're not going to need to keep that frozen. We could always rehydrate the blood if we had to in order to get more samples, but it's just usually not necessary. However, with sexual assault kits, we do keep them. We do keep them in the freezer. We don't allow those to dry out, mainly because they're unsolved, and so we may need to match that DNA later with someone else. So, since we're talking about sexual assaults and rape cases, investigators may need to collect and analyze DNA of past consensual partners within 4 days. So, as an investigator, you just have to be comfortable with asking uncomfortable questions, right? So, you're going to have to ask the victim, have you had other sexual partners in the last, 4 days or a week or whatever, and who those people are. You want to you want to ask that delicately. You don't want you don't want the victim to assume that you are making a judgment about their lifestyle. You want to be clear with them. Listen, I don't care if you've had past partners. However, I'm going to need to get DNA samples from them to rule them out, right? To ensure that they are not identified as suspects. And so that is why I'm asking. Um, they still may be reluctant at the end of the day, unless you can figure out on your own who their past consensual partners are. You may be beat on that, and you may just have people that are identified as suspects until you can go interview them. But that's not your problem, right? You just have to ask these uncomfortable questions sometimes. Taking DNA from the victim should be done at a hospital. You don't want to traumatize the victim more than already they've been traumatized. You want to collect their clothes. Hopefully they hadn't showered or cleaned their body off, because that will denigrate or maybe even completely dissolve any DNA that's left, but not always. And so even if they said, "Hey, I've showered and it was 3 days ago," since the assault, best practice is you still send them to the hospital. Recommend that they go to the hospital, right? We can't force them, but recommend that they go to the hospital to do a sexual assault kit. There, the nurse will perform the actual exam and collect any evidence that's there. For the suspect, we don't send them to the hospital. We bring a nurse to them, and we perform a not me, right? But the nurse comes and does the sexual assault kit there, wherever, usually either at a police station or holding cell or wherever, the jail. They do the kit there. They take some DNA from them. They'll take blood samples. Um, they take hair samples, saliva, that type of stuff, in order to rule out or identify them as suspects. And it's the same thing with the victim, right? They take samples from all over their body, to, one, identify their DNA, and then two, identify DNA from the suspect. Again, we're going to take clothing from both people, and search that clothing for the other person's DNA, right? If one person is saying I wasn't there and the other person says I was there, and we check each one of their underwear, to see if the other person's DNA is there, and we don't find DNA there, it doesn't mean they weren't there, but it makes it gives credibility to one side or the other. And well, I kind of jumped ahead here, but clothing to be collected, um, DNA, in I just like I want to make sure that everyone understands this. DNA is not the end all be all, right? Just because we find DNA or we don't find DNA doesn't mean we're going to be able to convict someone or not convict them, or prove that they did it or prove they didn't do it. It only helps strengthen one side or the other side's argument. There can be reasons people's DNA is at a location and they weren't involved in a crime. For example, you stay at a hotel, Friday and Saturday night, right? You check out Sunday evening, someone else checks into that room and then there's a murder that happens in that room, right? I don't know why I always go to murder, but that's just the easiest for people to understand. And there's a murder in that room. What is the likelihood that your DNA is going to be found in there, right? Probably pretty high. And they're going to come talk to you about, like, hey, why was your DNA in here? Well, that's going to be easy to rule out, right? They're going to get a list of everyone that's checked into that room for the last, 10 days or whatever. And, it should be pretty easy to rule you out as your DNA is there because you stayed in that room. But if we were just under the belief that if your DNA is there, bam, gotcha, you'd be going to jail for murder, right? But there's a perfect explanation on why you were there and not responsible for the murder. Um, Vice versa, just because your DNA wasn't found at the crime scene doesn't mean that you aren't the person responsible for it, right? Going back to sexual assaults, sometimes perpetrators will, make the victim shower before they leave, or make them pour bleach on their body or something like that, right? To ensure that any DNA is there is tampered with. The suspect will wear condoms. Again, that's just a further barrier to collecting DNA. And so maybe we don't get DNA off of that. Doesn't mean the suspect wasn't there. Doesn't mean that a crime didn't happen. It just means that we didn't get DNA from there. So, kind of a short chapter. DNA is important, but it's not the end all be all. Yeah. So, any questions? Reach out to me during the week or during office hours, and we'll get that stuff answered. Thanks so much.